Hi, hello. Welcome everybody to Ecobalance Action Interview. This is the first one, and I'm really excited to have this opportunity to hear about the work of Eric Ndeh Mboumien Ngang. Mboumien Ngang, apologies. He is in a 3-year of his PhD, the 3rd year, an in-depth study into local Indigenous knowledge and practices, how these can better inform lawmaking processes on climate change for sustainable management of natural resources and enhance their well-being. And Eric is undertaking the PhD studies in the context of Birmingham Law School. Incidentally, Eric and I met in 2011 when Eric was the Cameroon in-country coordinator for a work placement I did as part of the Wales for Africa programme, which is a whole other little story. Interestingly, and this is very exciting, Eric's essential work that he is doing as these studies will include a Kenya case study as well. So I'm really looking forward to hearing all about this, Eric. So welcome, and please just, introduce yourself and tell us about yourself, your background and what led you to this PhD.
Thank you very much, Mary, for inviting me to be the first one to have a discussion with you on Ecobalance. I come from Cameroon. Cameroon is in the central part of Africa, and I come from that typical rural community where I grew up seeing my parents and other community members living in harmony with the environment, because our very survival depended on the survival of the environment. But as I grew up, I realized this bond was gradually being broken with the taking over of new ways of life. And so I gradually saw the environment being suffering slowly with the new lifestyles that were being adopted by community members. I guess that's what actually motivated me to begin to think and ask questions why the sudden change, the sudden breakage in this harmony between our community and the environment on which we live. And so that experience, actually has shaped my reflection about the world, how I see the world, how I understand the world from different people's perspective. And of course, that has been the driver to my seeking knowledge in terms of my educational career, where I actually went to the university after my high school studies to study environmental science, just to understand what was the reason behind all this breakage. And later on, going back to work in the community between 2003 and 2011, where I was involved in participatory approaches to get communities sit on the driver's seat to define what development they want, because I understood by defining that and sitting on the driver's seat, they could actually get into those development processes. And that involved negotiating partnerships with both the government and other international NGOs and governments to be able to work towards bringing back this harmony that had been broken. And of course, after working with the communities, I went further to get a master's degree in environmental management and sustainability at the University of South Australia. And so you would see my continuous quest for knowledge in order to understand how I get communities working towards bringing back that balance that was once there. And of course, that's led me to my PhD, which is basically looking at how communities and their knowledge, which they had developed over ages through processes of experimentation, mutual learning, have used that to address issues of environmental challenges, issues of natural resources management. But of course, these knowledge systems have been sidelined when it comes to decision making at higher level. And so I'm taking the specific issue of climate change to look at how these communities' knowledge and practices that have been used over generations with success to address issues of environmental well-being, human well-being, how these knowledge systems can be integrated again in this whole notion of the phenomenon of climate change to build decisions, laws, policies that are responsive to the needs of the people. So that's what where I come from, how that has shaped my understanding of the world in relation to others, and how that has motivated me to continue to seek avenues where I can inform actors beyond my community that there is a rich source of knowledge down there that can be harnessed and would help to enhance human and environmental well-being, not only in the community where I come from, but that could be integrated into the global quest for building environmental and human well-being.
Absolutely, and it's really wonderful and essential that the studies, the connection of communities and that influence in actual legislative processes. So it's really exciting, and I really look forward to hearing more as your studies unfold and draw to a conclusion as well. It's really wonderful, so thank you. In terms of, obviously your studies are deeply connected with environmental sustainability and ecological sensitivity. So if you'd like to just talk a little bit more about how that is and go into a little detail there.
Yeah, my research is on climate change and local knowledge and practices, the role of agrarian communities or communities in general in legislative processes, as you put it, lawmaking, decision making, both at local, subnational, national, and international level. As I indicated in my research, I have done an in-depth research on what constitutes communities' local knowledge and practices, linking that to my background or the context where I grew up, understanding that it is communities' ways of knowing and doing that they've developed and transferred from one generation to another through a collective process of learning, mutual learning, collective process of experimentation, where they've used their natural protocols to validate some of these knowledge and practices, which they've used to address issues of environmental problems, natural resource management, and even local decision making when it comes to conflicts around communities on natural resources like water bodies, fertile lands, and even conflicts around power. Mm-hmm. So looking at how this links to my studies, when we look at the issue of lawmaking on climate change, we've got several actors saying, well, over the years, there's been lots of discussions around what can really be an effective process of decision making that would address the impacts of climate change on communities. And of course, it has basically been at international level with technical, managerial approaches, which have somehow not gotten communities with their knowledge and practices as players that can be co-producers of knowledge, co-producers of solutions to the climate change challenge. So my research is about getting this neglected or sidelined community knowledge and practices to the fore, and using Kenya as a case study, where the Kenyan government is one of those countries in Africa that has developed a law on climate change adaptation and a law on traditional knowledge and cultural expressions. So I want to go and examine that process and look at what makes it possible for communities to integrate their knowledge and practices in those processes to develop laws that are responsive to the needs of people at the grassroots. And it ties with what the international actors themselves have said, that especially in the Paris Declaration, which is the main international legal instrument on climate change, that says communities' knowledge, traditional knowledge, should be a critical knowledge that should be considered to enhance effective laws. And you have even those writers or contributing actors saying, well, we need to give some more space for traditional, ecological, native science in this whole discourse and actions on climate change adaptation. So I believe, and I strongly believe, that my research would be sustainable in that by engaging communities to be co-producers. Solution to climate change, it only helps to generate responsive laws that can be implemented from, moving them from the international current scenario, which is difficult to make meaning for communities, to laws that are understood by communities, and communities can take the engagement to implement those laws and thereby addressing in a sustainable way the impacts of climate change on them, and also addressing or mitigating in a sustainable way the causes or drivers of climate change.
Yes, and absolutely. And that's how exactly your studies are so essential, because you cannot separate sustainability and ecological sensitivity from social justice. The two issues are just enmeshed and so closely entangled and reliant, really. The well-being of human populations is reliant on the well-being of our context and our environmental populations, I would say, our environments and ecology as well. So it really is essential what you're doing and what you're describing, and the case study in Kenya is very exciting. So just talk a little bit about how that supports social justice, you know, the significance of that.
Yeah. Now, in my research, it would have been easy to just pick up the Paris Declaration and say, well, this is a well-crafted, well-developed law at the international level.
Yeah.
But my research seeks to examine deeper issues of social justice. What do I mean by this? I want to examine the procedural justice and also issues of distributive justice when it comes to decision-making, legislative processes, law-making on climate change.
Yeah.
When I talk about procedural justice, what I'm saying, I'm wanting to investigate is who are those involved in those decision-making processes? How are they involved? How are they consulted? Exactly. How do they participate in those processes? Mm-hmm. Do they consider those processes as legitimate processes where they are sure that their voices, their contributions will be valued in those processes, as opposed to a process which is top down, where they are simply presented with a piece of paper to sign that with decisions that have been made at a higher level.
Yeah.
Secondly, when it comes to this distributive justice, with respect to the benefits of every decision, climate change decision, do the people who participate in these processes sure that they are going to get the same benefits, be it social, economic, political benefits when it comes to these processes? For example, we've got a lot of motivation around getting climate change finances in order to help address, you know, the impacts, which is mostly felt by communities. When you go to Africa, over 70% of the population are smallholder farmers, and climate change has significantly impacted them and even their environments, and there are no cause of this. It is caused by some actors beyond their areas. Even where I come from, there was a dust plume in 2019 that destroyed the cocoyams, the colocasia, which is the staple of the communities. And these dust plumes were not generated from the community. Now, if there are resources to help communities, can communities access these resources in order to address the issues that have been impacted, their livelihoods that have been impacted? So I'm looking at this whole issue of distributive justice. So my research, you know, it's about social justice when it comes to the issue of lawmaking and the benefits that fall out of laws that are made.
Which is essential, because the frameworks themselves we're seeing evidentially are exploitative or creating damage that's inflicted on communities that hasn't been as a result of their own actions. And it's these frameworks that actually need support or scrutiny in change itself, if we really want to live as a world community in harmony with the planet that's available, that's life sustaining. And these exploitative frameworks, and that's why your analysis and research is so essential and wonderful, because it's actually really bringing attention to those frameworks themselves, but very grounded in the participation and the knowledge of that is held within the communities themselves. So that's really wonderful. So just to return to some of the questions, the context, or obviously, of these frameworks and in terms of the legislation, have a connection with economics, and the exploitative activities, if you like, that might have resulted in, you gave the example of the dust plume, will have been through some sort of economic activity as a result of that, or industrial activity. So are you able to describe a bit more about your studies in relation to ethical economics, how it supports economics orientated by well-being?
Yeah, my research, when you look at the whole notion of local knowledge and practices, local indigenous knowledge and practices, which is something that communities had developed and used with success over several decades, hundreds, thousands of years. And now you have a situation where this knowledge begins to have lots of meaning. It has lots of value in the eyes of international experts and actors, international industries, biopharmaceuticals, you know. And you have a situation where, rather than these people coming to communities to say, well, you are doing very well, your knowledge is so rich, we think we can support you in this process to develop this knowledge.
Exactly.
Got a whole notion of biopiracy, you know, biocolonization, you put it, where this knowledge is taken out of the community and developed. I'll give you an example in Cameroon, where we've got the bush mango, for example, that grows in the Congo Basin forest, and communities have used this over as a natural remedy for weight loss, as a natural delicacy in soups for weight loss.
Right.
And this is taken out, you know, by external forces, and is processed. I only went to Australia and realized, oh, there's the bush mango on the shelves of pharmacies as a slimming agent that has been patented by an international biopharmaceutical company, making huge amounts of money in Australia and the US, and at the detriment of communities. So that's an economic angle of it. And so my work is kind of wanting to get communities actually get control and ownership over their knowledge systems, so that they can enable external agents that want to make use of this knowledge, but to see it as free knowledge, which is open in the public domain, but something that has been developed by communities, and communities should be able to benefit from that. Yes. Now, when it comes to climate change, and I talked about distributive justice, if communities' knowledge and practices fit into national lawmaking processes, and it's deemed very necessary and important that, because of what communities are doing, it can contribute to environmental and human well-being. And we've got all these resources at the international level that trickles down to national level through the Global Environmental Fund, Global Climate Change Fund. What I'm trying to also emphasize in my research is that, because communities participate in developing these processes that fit into the national laws, when it comes to the distribution of benefits that accrue because of the existence, the development of these laws, to put a check on the negative impacts of on communities and human well-being, communities should not be left out.
Exactly.
The tenants,
Go on. And often when those exploitations happen to the detriment of the community, it's also definitely the environment as well, because the practices are not sensitive. The farming or industrialized practices are not sensitive, whereas the local communities know and understand how to maintain those ecologically sensitive relationships for there to be abundance and producing crops and things for years to come, rather than eroding the soil and other things that happen when knowledge and land is kind of extorted out of communities and into the private or the profit interests of companies. And weight loss is a huge industry. It will be, you know, making a lot of money, the use of the mangoes, and not having that reinvestment back into those communities obviously is highlighting a framework, a legal and an economic framework that it isn't healthy, is it? So your research is really fantastic. So that's to close. I just have a couple more kind of personal questions, really, Eric, is just to describe a bit more about your personal journey, the challenges or your growth edge during the process of these studies. You described a little bit at the beginning of our conversation, but it's really important to hear that the journey that we go through in our inquiry and commitment, and you know, as example today in your work.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mary. One of the things is having to think out of the box.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it would be easy to just stay back in my community and, you know, and remain there. Yeah. But having to think beyond the community in order to relate with other people, mm-hmm. to understand, you know, geographical understanding beyond the context where I come from hasn't been a smooth journey. It's mm-hmm. taken me time to actually build credibility, to get the opportunities out there to go understand how things are done in other contexts. And you see my academic journey from Cameroon through Australia and mm-hmm. then to the UK. So you can imagine the amount of exposure that I've had, but that hasn't been easy, you know, from that little village boy having to become an international scholar. And the good thing, one of the things I'm trying to do is to build that legitimacy, both from local level and international level, that gives me that opportunity, or that makes me stand out as that voice mm-hmm. to be able to represent community interest. So it takes time to build that legitimacy, that credibility, to be able to be an authoritative voice that is able to push forward the interest of communities. So,
and it's essential to do that because we are a whole international community as well. So it's essential that those journeys support and develop our kind of understanding when we're grappling with the challenges that we are collectively grappling with today. And that leads really nicely into my closing question, Eric, is about what inspires you? What's your motivation? I'm really, you know, keen to hear.
Yeah, I mean, I'm passionate about the fact that if communities are led to take the driver's seat mm-hmm. to define what development they want for themselves, what mm-hmm. they understand by globalization, mm-hmm. they can effectively participate and contribute to achieving that development, which becomes sustainable as opposed to development that is prescribed or prescriptive, top down, mm-hmm. where they seem not to identify with the processes, the systems, the instruments that are developed from elsewhere. And so with this in mind, that is what drives me on a daily basis to go out there, acquire knowledge, go back and engage with my communities and say, hey, look, this has worked somewhere else. I think it can also work here, while taking what has worked in my communities to the international domain and say, well, this is working in my community, this can also be tried. So I'm passionate about giving communities the rightful place they deserve in deciding whatever engagement they want to have in terms of developing and improving their well-being, and also the well-being of the environment and the systems on which they depend on.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. So before I close the interview, is there anything else you want to talk about or any questions you want to ask yourself, Eric? Or...
Thank you so much, Mary. I've actually followed lots of your your YouTube on the Ecobalance,
Mm-hmm.
and I sincerely identify with what you're doing, which is quite encouraging. And I would say I have not come across, packages that touch the ground, that actually gets people down on the ground. They're thinking about what they can do hands on the ground, as opposed to theoretical approaches to doing things. So I really encourage you with what you're doing, and I really want to continue to engage with you on this whole process, which I see quite laudable, to get people thinking about what we can practically do for human and environmental ecosystem well-being.
Yes. Oh, thank you so much, Eric. And I look forward to us keeping in touch with this dialogue, and especially reconnecting at another juncture in your studies, because it's really marvelous and it's so essential what you're doing. So thank you very much. And for people who have been listening to this interview and are interested to, follow Eric in his studies, please do subscribe to his YouTube channel and social media. I'll put the links below this video, so you can really follow this really incredible and essential journey as you've listened to his interesting talks. So that's kind of more or less, oh, and one more thing as well, that's more or less what I had to say. But if you or a project or organisation would like to be part of an Ecobalance action interview like this one, then I'd be really keen and pleased to hear from you. So please do be in touch. The contacts are below this video. I really look forward to that and to hosting more Ecobalance action interviews in the future. So thank you very much for listening, and do take care. Thank you.